I just wanted to wash my face, but I found a woman sleeping on the floor of my bathroom. I thought about calling security. Instead, I offered her coffee. She looked me in the eyes, and everything changed in that moment. William Johnson arrived at the building before 6 in the morning, something he hadn't done since his father's death 2 years ago. He didn't greet anyone. He made his way straight to the top floor, to his office on the rooftop of the glass building on Paseo de la Reforma. He needed to be alone. He hadn't slept well, his head felt heavy, and the day was just beginning. He entered the private bathroom seeking cold water to clear his mind. He flipped the light switch. Then he froze. A woman was sleeping next to the sink. She was dirty, her clothes torn, and her feet were bare. She had curled up as though she had been in that position for hours. William's heart raced. He thought about calling security but didn't. Something stopped him. The woman was young, slender. She seemed exhausted, not dangerous. She woke suddenly, startled by his presence. She leaned against the wall and tried to sit up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I just needed a safe place to sleep," she said with a firm voice. She didn't ask for help, she simply apologized. Her words were clear, and there was an unsettling calmness in her tone, strange for someone in her situation. William noticed that despite her appearance, she didn't seem defeated. She held her head high. He stayed silent for a moment, not understanding how she had gotten in. The building had 24-hour security, but he didn't ask about that. He ran a hand through his hair, took a deep breath, and said the first thing that came to mind. "What's your name?" The young woman hesitated for a second, then answered, her eyes fixed on him. "Sophia. Sophia Anderson." She said it with a mix of shame and pride. William didn't know what to do, but he didn't move either. She said it with a mixture of shame and pride. William didn't know what to do, but he didn't move either. He stood there for a moment in silence, until he slowly turned toward the sink, turned on the tap, and filled a glass with water. He offered it to her gently, as though presenting something far more valuable than just a simple drink. Sophia looked at him, doubtful. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the glass with both hands. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you." William didn't respond. He simply watched her. There was something about this woman that stirred something in his stomach, but not in a bad way. She didn't look like someone who lived on the streets. Not by the way she spoke, not by the way she looked at him, not even by the way she sat now, upright, trying to hold on to some semblance of dignity. Her eyes were wide, alert, as if she was constantly waiting to be kicked out. And yet, she wasn't asking to stay. She wasn't asking for anything. "How long have you been here?" he asked, his gaze never leaving her. Sophia leaned back against the wall, the glass still held firmly in her hands. 2 days. I come in at night. I leave before everyone shows up." The precision in her answer, the calm way she spoke caught his attention. William furrowed his brow. "Had you done this before? Sleep here?" She lowered her gaze. She seemed uncomfortable with the question. "No. Just here. Because it seems safe." The words "seems safe" resonated strongly in his mind. It was like hearing someone speak who had been running away for too long. William ran his hand over his face, sighed, and shook his head. But instead of telling her to leave, instead of acting like the CEO he was, with authority and clear rules, he did something he didn't fully understand himself. "Let's go get coffee." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right. William repeated, his tone more direct, as if giving her no option. "Come on, you need to eat something and take a shower." It wasn't an order, but it didn't sound like a suggestion either. Sophia hesitated, but eventually nodded with a slight movement of her head. She followed William to the elevator, walking slowly. She was hunched, as if trying to disappear into the glass walls. In the car, she remained silent the entire way. She stared out the window, attentively but without emotion. Her hands were clenched tight around the seatbelt, as if that simple strip of fabric was the only thing holding her to something real. William said nothing. He didn't want to pressure her. But inside, the questions began to pile up. They arrived at an elegant bakery on a quiet corner in Florence. The pale stone facade, the clean windows, the smell of freshly baked bread. William got out first and opened the door on the passenger side. Sophia stepped out slowly. She walked to the entrance, eyes on the ground, feeling out of place among the people eating breakfast, typing on their laptops, and wearing expensive watches. Once they sat down, William picked up the menu. She didn't. She tried to refuse with a gesture. "You can pick whatever you want," he said firmly, placing the menu on the table. Sophia looked down, uncomfortable. "Just black coffee. That's fine." William smiled for the first time that morning. His eyes were tired, but something in her response seemed almost absurd. "You look like someone who really enjoys sweet things." Sophia looked at him, surprised. She hesitated for a second, then smiled, a small, shy smile that faded quickly, but was enough to change the atmosphere. When the plates arrived, a cardamom bun, a cinnamon roll, and 2 steaming cups of coffee, William watched Sophia take a piece of the bread with her fingers. She tasted it slowly, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered softly, "This has cardamom and a touch of real vanilla." William looked at her curiously, not just for what she had said, but how she had said it. As if she knew, as if she was familiar with those flavors. It wasn't a casual observation, it was knowledge, and that only raised more questions in his mind. If you're watching this far, I'm sure you're enjoying it. So I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. "Do you know about food?" William asked, still holding his cup. Sophia nodded without hesitation. "I was a sous chef at a restaurant in Nevada, before everything." The last word hung in the air, like an invisible thread neither of them dared to pull. William felt a jolt of confusion, not because he didn't believe her, but because he couldn't reconcile the image of this woman, just an hour ago, curled up on the bathroom floor, with the idea of someone who had worked in a professional kitchen. There was a story there, a whole story kept in silence, and it was beginning to form a blurry shape in his mind. "Why did you stop?" he asked, his tone softer now. Sophia shrugged slightly. It wasn't a question she liked to answer. "I spent 6 years in the kitchen. I learned everything, from washing dishes to making complex reductions. I spoke English with the suppliers, French with the head chef." She paused, then her eyes on the table added, "But that doesn't matter anymore." She didn't say it with pity. She said it like a verdict, like someone at some point had already decided her previous life was cancelled. William didn't know what to say. He wasn't an impulsive man, but something in him had shifted since he found her. It was as if his routine had been broken on purpose, as if life, always so controlled, so predictable, had decided to surprise him, forcibly. They walked together to the car. Sophia seemed more relaxed now, although she still didn't speak much. During the drive back to the building, she thanked him for the breakfast, for his treatment, for the respectful silence. When they arrived, she straightened her hair, straightened her back, and prepared to leave. "Thank you for not calling security," she said, with a hint of humor that wasn't meant to be funny. William stopped her just before she walked away from the elevator. "Do you want to work with me for a week?" Sophia looked at him with the distrust of someone who has heard too many promises with double edges. Her eyebrow arched, the same expression someone would have if offered a coin that shines too brightly. "Why?" William didn't lie. He didn't hide behind empty formulas. He simply spoke the truth. because I want to understand how someone like you ended up on that floor." The sincerity disarmed Sophia a little. It was visible in her eyes. But she didn't lower her guard. She looked at him for a long moment. She was used to reading intentions, recognizing disguised pity, morbid curiosity, superiority. But in William, she sensed something else, something she couldn't name, but it wasn't cruelty. "1 week," she said slowly. "But if this is some sort of social experiment or undercover charity, I'll leave as soon as I figure it out." "It's nothing like that." He called his assistant Emma from his office. She was efficient and had no patience for unnecessary details. He asked her to get new clothes for a guest, arrange access to the executive bathroom on the administrative floor, and find a temporary workspace near his for her to sit. Emma didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Yes, sir," as always. For the rest of the day, Sophia accompanied William in silence. She sat at the back of each meeting. She didn't interrupt, take notes, or ask questions. She just listened, but not distractedly. She listened with surgical attention. She observed the gestures, the key words, the silences. William noticed how her expression shifted with each topic: suppliers, mergers, contracts, as if she was storing everything in a corner of her mind, ready to use it later. At the end of the day, William offered to take her home. "Thanks, but I need to take care of something first," Sophia replied, not giving further details. William simply nodded. He didn't insist. But before she left, he asked, 8 o'clock tomorrow?" Sophia stopped at the elevator door, turned her head slightly, and replied without hesitation, "I'll be here." And then she left, slipping through the city lights as if she were smoke, as if she could vanish at any moment. The next day, Sophia arrived before William. It was barely 7 in the morning, and she was already sitting in one of the small rooms on the administrative floor, her hair tied back in a simple bun, her clothes clean but unadorned, yet well put together. She had a black, hardcover notebook with her, and a pen that she twirled between her fingers as she waited. Her expression was calm, though her eyes revealed a deep exhaustion, the kind that doesn't disappear with a night of sleep. William saw her from the other end of the hall when he stepped out of the elevator. He was surprised, though he didn't show it. He gave a slight nod and invited her to follow him. There were no words of welcome, no light jokes, just a look that said, "Let's get to work." Throughout the morning, William put her to the test. Nothing aggressive, but calculated. He asked her to make coffee with specific ingredients, a rare blend of Chiapas coffee with a light touch of cinnamon and frothy oat milk. Sophia made it without hesitation, presenting it perfectly with the right temperature. Then he asked her to make a call to Paris, to a contact from a gastronomic company with which his group had tried to close a deal years ago. Sophia spoke fluent French, without stumbling, with a formal tone that even surprised him. Finally, during an impromptu meeting, he threw unexpected logistical questions at her, as if trying to find the limits of her improvisation. Sophia answered every single one with precision, as if she had had those schemes in her head for years. By the end of the morning, William leaned against his desk, arms crossed, watching her like someone discovering a closed box that was slowly revealing valuable pieces. He was surprised, and although he wouldn't admit it out loud, he was also impressed. In the afternoon, they decided to attend a lunch with foreign investors. It was a formal meal at a restaurant in San Diego, with private tables and a tasting menu. Sophia didn't say a word throughout the meeting, but her presence didn't go unnoticed. She watched everyone with a calculated stillness. She observed how they moved, who took the initiative in decisions, who hid doubts behind polite smiles. She didn't take notes, but she was absorbing everything. On the way back in the car, William broke the silence with a question that, in another context, would have seemed like a simple courtesy. "What do you think of them?" Sophia didn't hesitate. She gave a precise analysis of each person, describing their insecurities, their priorities, even anticipating what kind of clauses they would fight for in a contract. She said it all with a calm, almost academic tone, as if she had read the minds of each person at that table. William smiled, unable to hide his astonishment. "You see what no one else sees." Sophia glanced out the window before replying. "When you have nothing, you learn to observe everything." That sentence echoed in his mind long into the night. By the third day, William put her at the forefront of his schedule. He asked her to filter calls, organize meetings, and coordinate tasks that his personal assistant would normally handle. Sophia did it all with an efficiency that made some in the office uncomfortable. Every name, every number, every detail, she registered and remembered it without needing to look at any papers. Her intuition for knowing when to speak and when to stay silent was almost perfect. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, but she made small decisions that led to quick results. However, the looks started to change. Some employees began whispering behind her back. It showed in the hallways, during coffee breaks, in the messages they exchanged among themselves. Who is that woman? Where did she come from? Why does William trust her so much? The questions grew, laced with suspicion and a clear sense of discomfort. Sophia pretended not to hear. She kept her eyes straight ahead, continued working, even greeted people with politeness. But at night, when she returned to an improvised refuge, a nameless place on a side street in Maywood, she locked herself in a room without windows, sat on the edge of the bed with her notebook in her hands, and cried in silence, because she still didn't know if all of this was real, if she should believe it, if she should trust. For his part, William began noticing something that unsettled him. He thought about her when she wasn't there. He remembered her voice, her answers. He was surprised at how often he imagined what she would do in certain situations. It was too much more than he should allow. At the end of that intense week, filled with observant silences, flawless work, and attention that seemed to grow at every corner of the office, William scheduled a private meeting with Sophia. He did it early, without giving any indication of the reason. He simply asked her to come up to his office at 5 o'clock. She arrived on time. She walked through the door with a calm face, but her body was rigid, as if she were preparing for bad news. Deep down, she had been expecting it. Maybe she had upset someone important, or perhaps her presence had become too uncomfortable. Maybe it had just been a week-long experiment, some strange trial in human business relations. She sat across from him, hands resting on her lap, fingers pressed together without her noticing. William didn't beat around the bush. "You've changed the atmosphere here," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. "There's something about you that feels unusual, but not in a bad way. I want you to stay." Sophia blinked. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She wanted to ask if he was serious, but something in his tone, firm and honest, told her it wasn't just a casual compliment or an attempt to be nice. "I need to think about it," she replied, surprised to hear her own voice, and even more surprised by the firmness with which she said it. William nodded naturally. "Take your time." And that was it. He didn't push her. He didn't offer more arguments. He simply let her go, as if he knew the decision had to come from her. That night, Sophia didn't return to her refuge. Instead, she stayed at the house of a friend from her old restaurant days. They reconnected after years of silence. The friend, upon seeing her, didn't ask any questions. She opened the door, offered her hot food, and said she could sleep in the guest room. Sophia lay in a bed with clean sheets, a firm mattress, and a heavy quilt. It was the first real bed in months. She cried quietly, feeling that something was beginning to change, although she didn't know if she should trust it. Across the city, William was alone in his apartment. He didn't have dinner. He sat staring at his phone for several minutes, opening and closing apps aimlessly. Finally, he logged into the office security camera system and searched for the video from her first day, the exact moment when he turned on the light and found her by the sink. He pressed play. He watched her wake up, startled, how she leaned against the wall, frightened but dignified. The way she got up, the clarity with which she spoke, the care with which she apologized without begging for anything. He looked at her with different eyes, with the distance of the days and the closeness he could no longer deny. The same feeling hit him again. This woman wasn't broken. She was resisting. The next morning, Sophia returned. She went up to the administrative floor with a steady step, crossing the hallway as if she already knew where she was headed. She knocked twice on William's office door. "I accept," she said as soon as he looked at her, "but with one condition. I don't want charity. I want to work for real." William smiled, that brief, sincere smile that came out of him only in rare moments. "You're already working. You just forgot because you're too good." Sophia lowered her gaze slightly, but she didn't laugh or feel uncomfortable. Her cheeks flushed a bit, but her eyes didn't leave his. Something had changed now. An unspoken agreement. A line that, though still invisible, was beginning to be drawn between them. As the weeks went by, Sophia began to learn every corner of the place, every unwritten custom in the office, every particular gesture of the partners, the tones in which they spoke when something was wrong, and the pauses they made when something couldn't be said aloud. She dove headfirst into the accounts, the ongoing projects, the strategic names, the critical dates. William, without realizing it at first, began to trust her with a naturalness that bordered on blindness. He didn't need to explain things twice. One brief sentence, and Sophia would already understand the underlying details. Some nights, William invited her to business dinners where her presence was subtle yet decisive. Other times, without notice, he would stop by her desk and tell her, "Let's go," as if there was no need to explain where they were headed. They would go to hidden cafes in Roma, old bakeries in Coyoacán, or small terraces with views of streets where the city seemed to pause for a moment. They didn't speak much, but the little they did say lingered for days. One of those afternoons, while they shared a traditional dessert in a tiny place south of the city, Sophia tasted a dulce de leche with nuts, closed her eyes for a moment, and murmured, "This tastes like childhood." William looked at her, curious. He had learned to recognize that each of her phrases carried something more. "Was your childhood sweet?" She hesitated. She opened her eyes, but didn't look directly at him. "Not exactly, but sometimes I pretended it was." That answer stuck with William, buried deep in his mind like an invisible thorn. He would return to it in the silences of the elevator during late-night emails, in the calm moments before sleep. It seemed like the harshest and the tenderest thing anyone could say at the same time. On a rainy Friday, during a meeting with an important group of Brazilian investors, William went through something of a crisis. It wasn't a visible collapse, but his voice cracked. He got stuck on the figures, couldn't maintain focus, and something in his chest began to tighten. No one in the room knew what to do. Sophia did. She intervened with elegance, took over the conversation, slid the data in naturally, redirected the attention to the key points, and managed to turn the meeting around, not just saving it, but ending with a preliminary agreement signed. When they left the room, William didn't say anything. He walked a few steps behind her, as if not knowing how to thank her. "Thank you," he finally managed to say when they entered his office. Sophia turned around, arms crossed, an odd calm in her eyes. "We're even. You gave me solid ground. I give you presence." That sentence, so hers, disarmed him, because it was precise, fair, and true. Since then, both of them knew that something was growing between them, but neither of them said anything, as if putting it into words might ruin it. as if the silence was a sacred pact protecting whatever was unfolding between them. For her part, Sophia started writing recipes again. She had a special notebook where she jotted down ideas, combinations, memories of flavors. At night, she visited houses of acquaintances, old friends or fellow chefs who still opened their doors to her. She cooked for them, experimented, shared. She didn't charge. She just needed to feel the kitchen alive in her hands again. William knew. Not because she told him in detail, but because he listened to everything. Every time Sophia mentioned a new ingredient, a mistake she had corrected in a dough, a spice she had rescued from the Vancouver market, he paid attention, as if he were studying her, as if, without saying it, he too was part of that quiet rebirth. Until one night, unannounced, he appeared at one of those small events Sophia organized. A friend had passed him the address. He came alone, in casual clothes, and said nothing. He stayed at the back, watching how Sophia moved between pots, plates, and voices. He looked at her with a focus that wasn't curiosity or admiration. It was something deeper, as if he were seeing her for the first time, without the filter of the context, the suit, the office, and he didn't leave. He stayed there, observing. Sophia noticed him after a few minutes. She recognized him immediately, even before seeing his face. It was his posture, the way he crossed his arms, the way his eyes never got distracted by anything else. He stayed still, not knowing whether to approach or just keep going, as if nothing had changed. This wasn't her world. This wasn't a business meeting or a formal dinner with clients. This was her private space, a place of flavors, memories, and slow fire. And he was here. For her. William didn't move from his spot the entire night. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't interfere with anything. But he didn't step away either. He just watched her. Sometimes with a slight smile, sometimes with that expression of someone processing something that went beyond the obvious. There was no need to approach, to feel his presence. Every time Sophia passed near him, she could feel his gaze as a warm presence on her back. And yet, it didn't make her uncomfortable. Quite the opposite. It was as though he was silently holding her up, as if he understood that here there was no need for words. By the end of the evening, when only dirty plates, half-empty glasses, and fading laughter remained, Sophia walked over to him. Her hands were still damp, her hair messy from the heat of the kitchen. "You didn't have to come," she said, not reproachfully, not sarcastically, just the truth. William looked at her without rushing. His voice was simple. "But I wanted to." They walked together to his car. They didn't say anything. It was gently raining, and the city seemed to have lowered its volume. William opened the door for her, and for a few seconds, the only sound was the water hitting the roof. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was intimate, as if speaking would interrupt something more important than words. He dropped her off at the entrance of the building where she now lived, thanks to a silent agreement with an old cooking colleague. Before Sophia got out of the car, he spoke. He didn't look directly at her, but he didn't hide either. "You're the most real thing in my life." Sophia didn't answer. She simply looked at him with a mixture of confusion, emotion, and something very close to relief. She got out of the car without saying anything more. She went upstairs, took off her shoes, and went straight to bed. But she didn't fall asleep right away. That sentence, so unexpected, so blunt, kept bouncing in her mind. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what she felt. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the office on time, as always. But something about her was different. She was still firm, professional, focused. But her gestures had a new softness, an openness in her gaze. It was as if she was carrying less weight on her shoulders, as if something inside her had finally aligned. William, too, was different. It showed in the small details. He avoided unnecessary conversations with other women, the ones he used to have more out of habit than real interest. He didn't answer ambiguous messages. He didn't leave early. He didn't delay his return to work. He wanted clarity. He wanted her. In the evening, he waited for her in the lobby of the building, right at the exit of the main elevator. She found him there, leaning against a column as if he had been waiting for her all day. "Let's have dinner tonight," he said as soon as he saw her. "Just the two of us, no excuses." Sophia smiled, a real smile without defense or masks. It was the first time he saw her laugh like that, with her eyes shining and her lips curving without fear. "All right, but you're paying?" William let out a brief laugh. The dinner was at a discreet place, with soft lighting and tables separated by plants, giving the sense of intimacy without seclusion. It wasn't one of those high-end restaurants where everything feels artificial. It was warm, calm, with a simple menu and well-prepared flavors. Sophia ordered a vegetarian dish. William roasted fish with spiced rice. They didn't talk about the office. They didn't talk about anyone else. It was a conversation without pressure, without masks. At first, Sophia spoke with some caution, but little by little, the words flowed. She told him about her childhood in a working-class neighborhood in Nevada, the smell of toasted bread coming from her grandmother's kitchen, the noise of the pots on Sundays. She remembered the first knife she used in a professional kitchen, the day she almost burned herself with a badly made flambé, and the taste of the first recipe she managed to make on her own. William listened without interrupting. He didn't try to give advice, to correct her, or to soften anything. He just looked at her, nodded, and when necessary, smiled. Then came the hard part. The day everything fell apart. A family problem that left her without a home, an unexpected debt, the collapse of the restaurant where she worked, the betrayal of someone she trusted. Sophia didn't cry, but her voice dropped and her hands stopped moving over the napkin. William stayed there, silent, present, and that, for her, was already love. Not the kind that promises things, but the kind that stays still, firm, when someone opens a wound. At the end of the night, they walked slowly to his car. Sophia buttoned up her coat because the air had already started to carry the humidity of autumn. William didn't say anything. At the door, before she got in, he took her hand, not urgently, but gently. "I want to see you again tomorrow." Sophia looked at him, amused, as if the phrase didn't make sense. "You see me every day." William held her gaze. "Not like this. I want to see you when you're not protecting yourself." Sophia didn't respond. She just smiled, and that smile was enough. That night, when she got home, she took off her shoes, her coat, and collapsed on the bed. There was no noise in her mind. There was no distrust. For the first time, she didn't doubt what he felt, nor what she was beginning to accept she felt too. The next day, they arrived at work together. It wasn't planned, but it happened. And everyone noticed. Not because they arrived holding hands or because they made any obvious gesture. It was something else, a different energy. It wasn't just respect or admiration. It was care. The way he opened the way for her in the hallway. The way she passed him documents without him asking. During a meeting with investors, one of them, arrogant, sure of his Harvard English and inherited money, tried to impose a ridiculous idea with a haughty tone. Sophia, with her calm voice and a slight smile, dismantled the argument in 3 sentences. The room fell silent. William barely contained a laugh. Hours later, alone in the elevator, he looked at her out of the corner of his eye. "You inspire me in everything." Sophia turned her face towards him, head slightly tilted, and looked at him without blinking. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Her gaze was the answer. When they left work, she thought he would have already left. But there he was, leaning against the wall at the entrance, waiting for her. "Tonight, it's my turn to laugh at you," he said. "Come with me." She didn't ask where they were going. She just got in the car. He took her to the south of the city, to a street from his youth. Among closed stores and dim lights, they stopped in front of a street vendor with old tarps and plastic chairs. William sat as if it were his home. He ordered suadero and tripe tacos. Sophia watched him, a mix of surprise and contained laughter. "Did you eat here?" "Every Friday for years," he answered with nostalgia. They ate under a yellow lamp that flickered in the wind. Sauce slipped down Sophia's hand, but she didn't care. She took a bite of a taco, closed her eyes, and sighed. "You've taken me back," she said. William didn't know how to respond, but in his chest, something told him that, finally, they were in the same place. The relationship between the two became impossible to hide, not because they made open displays of affection, but because it was evident in the way they spoke to each other, how they looked at each other when crossing the hallways, in the almost natural way their routines had intertwined. Employees whispered. It was noticeable in the awkward pauses, when Sophia entered a room, in the murmurs among co-workers, in the looks exchanged when William went down to the cafeteria with her. But no one dared to say anything directly. They didn't know whether they feared him more or the certainty that Sophia was not someone to be taken lightly. Even so, William didn't want to leave any loose ends. One afternoon, after the last partner had left his office, he called her in. "I need to talk to you," he said, with the tone he used only when something stirred inside him. Sophia entered and closed the door. She sat down across from him, unafraid. "Tell me," William took a breath, as if searching for the cleanest words possible. "If this, what we're building, affects you in any way, if it damages your image, your work, I'll step away. I don't want you to pay a price for something I couldn't control." Sophia looked at him for a few seconds that felt long. Then, without saying anything, she stood up, circled the desk, and sat on the edge, facing him. She took his hand, not quickly, but with a calm firmness. "Do you think I care what they think after everything I've been through?" It was the only answer, and it was enough. That night, after closing the office, they walked aimlessly through the Roma neighborhood. The sky was clear, and the city had that particular silence of late Thursdays. They didn't talk much. When they reached an almost empty park, they stopped in front of a bench. William looked at her. Sophia did too. They kissed, slowly, gently. Like two people who didn't have to rush, like those who have finally found solid ground after floating for too long. It wasn't an eager kiss. It was a kiss that said, "I see you, I'm here, and don't leave." There were no promises. There were no speeches. Just truth. They slept together for the first time that night, but they didn't undress. There was no urgency. They just lay in the same bed, fully clothed, holding each other. Sophia had her head resting on his chest. William wrapped his arm around her, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. They didn't speak, they just breathed in sync, like those who, before making love with their bodies, need to rest their hearts. The following days at the office continued as usual, at least on the surface. They worked as always, meetings, documents, emails, decisions. But behind the scenes, they were already one. Sophia understood what William needed without him speaking. William knew when to give her space and when to get closer, just to leave a note with his handwriting on the corner of her desk. Sundays became sacred. Sophia cooked for him, not as an obligation, but as a way of communicating. She prepared things that weren't in books, broths with memories, breads with nostalgia, desserts that spoke of what she kept silent. William, in exchange, washed the dishes awkwardly but with determination. He dried each one with patience, as if that simple routine was holding something they didn't want to break. William stopped attending social events. He no longer went to dinners with other businessmen or to empty meetings. When asked, he said the same thing, with the calmness of someone who no longer feels rushed. The best part of my world is now inside my office and in her kitchen. Sophia smiled when she heard it. Not with euphoria, with calmness, with something akin to gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she saw herself being loved with gentleness, without violence, without conditions, and above all, accepting that without trying to escape. A new project came up. William had been turning an idea over in his mind for weeks, one that grew stronger each day, to open a new branch in Nevada, an integrated center combining business, tourism, and traditional cuisine. It was an ambitious move, but it wasn't the concept that unsettled him. What really made him nervous was the role he wanted Sophia to play in the project. One afternoon, in his office, with the plans spread out on the table and the budget sheet still unsigned, he told her directly, "I want you to take charge of the culinary space." Sophia raised her eyes from the documents. He wasn't joking, his face said it all. But she, who had learned to read between the lines, needed to ask, "Would you trust something that big to me?" William didn't hesitate for a second. "Trusting you is the easiest thing I've done in years." The answer didn't come from a romantic place, but from a deep certainty. From someone who had seen Sophia navigate pressure, noise, and expectations without ever losing her essence. Days later, they traveled together to Nevada to check the land where the new project would rise. They took an early flight. They didn't talk much. They were tired, but at ease. At some point during the journey, Sophia fell asleep. William did too. And without either of them seeking it, their hands met. They slept like that, holding hands, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Arriving in Nevada was like opening a forgotten chest for Sophia. Every street brought back a memory. The smell of freshly baked bread from the corner of the Zocalo, the colorful facades, the stone churches, the sound of footsteps on the ancient tiles. William walked beside her in silence. He didn't ask questions, he didn't interrupt. He simply walked with her, respecting every pause, every long glance at an old door or a market corridor. They visited the stands at the central market, tried tlayudas, mole negro, tejate. Sophia let herself go in laughter, anecdotes from her childhood, and games of flavors. William didn't stop looking at her, not as someone looks at someone they love, but as someone observes something sacred, like someone who knows that moment won't repeat itself in the same way. That night, on the hotel terrace where they were staying, Sophia sat with a glass of mezcal in her hands. The view was beautiful, but what weighed heavily was the silence between them, comfortable and firm. "You've changed my story," she said suddenly, without drama. William looked at her tenderly. He didn't rush to answer. When he did, he spoke quietly. "You taught me how to live for real." There were no kisses that night, no excessive hugs, just a brief conversation that ended with long glances and a new certainty. They returned to Los Angeles with their decision made. William would be in charge of the overall management of the project. Sophia would be the culinary director, partners, but also life companions. The idea was not just to build a new physical space, but to lay the foundation for something deeper, a new stage, a new chapter. That night, back at home, Sophia took out her journal, one of those old notebooks she had kept for years and only wrote in when something stirred inside her. With a slow hand, she wrote, "Maybe love is this, someone who holds your fall and walks beside you after." The next morning, as Sophia prepared breakfast, William walked by her desk looking for some papers. The journal was there, open. He didn't do it on purpose, but he read it. Just that sentence. The following months were intense. The Nevada branch started as an ambitious idea, but soon it became a reality that demanded their full attention. The renovations of the place, the search for suppliers, the interviews for the staff, the team's training, everything became part of their daily lives. Sophia and William lived among plans, recipes, invoices, and decisions, and at the same time among gentle gestures, knowing glances and silences that spoke louder than any words. The project took shape, and so did the love. For the first time, Sophia allowed herself to trust without fear. William every day learned that letting go wasn't surrendering, but understanding that love also meant relinquishing control. They were different. She came from the land, from physical effort, from the silence that holds hard things. He came from power, from structure, from the order that imposes itself. But they met in honesty, and that was enough to hold everything together. Still, not everything was easy. One night, just weeks before the grand opening, they argued in the test kitchen about the final menu. Sophia insisted on including a dish with native corn and cocoa sauce. William thought it was too risky for the early days of the opening. The tension rose. He wanted efficiency. She wanted identity. Suddenly, in the middle of their back and forth of arguments, Sophia raised her voice. "I'm not your employee." The echo of her shout bounced off the kitchen walls. William stood still. He didn't get upset. He didn't counterattack. He just looked at her with a calmness that wasn't indifference but clarity. "I know. You're my choice." It was the only thing he said. Sophia didn't answer. She just walked out. She slammed the door behind her, walked several blocks aimlessly, and ended up sitting on a bench in the park where they had shared their first kiss. She cried, not because of what he had said, but because of what she felt. The fear that had followed her from other times, from other bonds where they controlled her, silenced her, reduced her. She was afraid of losing herself again in something that looked like love. That night, William didn't follow her. He knew that sometimes silence was more respectful than an early apology. The next day, early in the morning, he arrived at the restaurant with 2 hot coffees. He entered the kitchen without saying a word, left one on the table, and without looking directly at her, spoke. "You're free. You always will be." Sophia watched him with swollen eyes, and she hugged him. It wasn't a hug of reconciliation. It was something deeper. It was a hug that said, "Thank you for not trying to win me over." More than love, it was security. And for her, that changed everything. Finally, the day of the grand opening arrived. Everything was ready. The space, the menu, the team, the background music. They had worked with precision and soul. Friends, old colleagues, important clients, and even gastronomic critics were there. William wore a black suit, sober and elegant. Sophia, white, in a simple yet imposing dress, as if she was celebrating the rebirth of something she hadn't imagined she could recover. The event was a success. People tried the dishes with wonder, asked questions, congratulated them, took pictures. There was energy, excitement, truth. At the end of the night, while giving brief interviews to the local press, a young reporter asked what the secret to success was. Sophia didn't think much about it. She glanced at William and answered, "Choosing someone who doesn't give up on you." The reporter was surprised, expecting a more technical, more common answer. But William, without letting go of his glass, completed it without hesitation. "And cooking with the heart, always." And then they looked at each other, not with euphoria, with peace, the peace of having chosen with the soul and of having been chosen with freedom. The restaurant became an immediate success. In less than 3 months, the reviews spoke of an authentic, powerful, and emotional proposal. The culinary critic of Los Angeles referred to it as a cuisine that doesn't just feed, but embraces. Sophia, who until recently had been sleeping in office bathrooms, now appeared in specialized magazines, invited to gastronomic fairs and conferences. Her name started circulating strongly among the most respected chefs in the country. Some saw her as the most promising figure in the new Mexican cuisine. As for William, he received several offers for expansion. They wanted to replicate the model in other cities, open franchises, scale. But he said no, at least for now. He repeated, with the calmness of someone who no longer feels rushed, that he didn't want to miss this stage. He wanted to be there every day, to see the oven light up, to hear the first laughter from the team at dawn, to smell the bread coming out of the oven, to enjoy the moment and her. They decided to move in together to a small apartment in the center of Nevada, an old building with thick walls, high ceilings, and iron-wrought balconies. It wasn't luxurious, but it had soul. There were no views of skyscrapers or fast elevators, only cobblestone streets, neighbors who greeted each other with a nod, and a kitchen with natural light that came in every morning. They lived far from the grandeur, but close to what was essential. It was there, in this new routine, that Sophia felt something inside her begin to heal with more firmness. One day, without thinking too much about it, she called her sister. They hadn't spoken in years. She invited her to dinner. William set the table, lit candles, and played soft music. Sophia cooked with some nervousness, as if it were her first menu. The dinner was simple: a mole de olla, handmade tortillas, hibiscus water with cinnamon. But the atmosphere was charged with something deeper. At the end of the night, while Sophia washed the dishes and William served the last coffee, her sister came close to her, hugged her without warning, and whispered in her ear, "I've never seen you like this. You seem alive." Sophia didn't answer. She just squeezed her eyes shut, like someone who finally understands that everything that hurt had a purpose. A week later, William came home with a small wooden box. He left it on the kitchen counter between the spice jars. Sophia, distracted, opened it thinking it was a new ingredient, but inside, instead of turmeric or cardamom, there was a simple ring with a beautiful opaque stone. William didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He just leaned against the counter and looked at her. "Will you marry me?" Sophia stood in silence, caught between laughter and tears. She couldn't believe it. But at the same time, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "You know how to surprise me," she said, wiping away a tear that escaped. "You can't plan love," he replied. "It just happens." The wedding was small, only the closest people. The restaurant team, a couple of William's old friends, Sophia's sister, and two neighbors from the building who had already come to think of them as family. There were no ostentatious dresses or luxury halls. They got married in a garden with simple cloth tablecloths and wildflowers. But the emotion was immense. Sophia wore white in a light fabric that moved with the wind. William wore a black shirt and a smile that didn't fit on his face. When she said yes, it wasn't in a trembling voice. She said it with a firm chest, clear eyes, like someone who didn't doubt, like someone who closed a chapter. Not of pain, but of rebirth. Life as a couple wasn't perfect. William and Sophia knew that from the first month of living together. There were days when the pots went unwashed, when the silences were long, not out of peace, but because of anger. There were differences about time, about routines, about how the restaurant staff should be managed, or whether it was better to save money or invest it. There were heated arguments, nights without speaking, fatigue that weighed more than affection. But there was also every morning a choice. The choice to stay, to keep sharing, to not let go. Love, like bread, was made with daily work. One day, William received the news that one of his biggest contracts, a business expansion project with a European fund, had completely fallen through. It was $1 million loss. Something that, at another time in his life, would have pushed him to take a flight back to Los Angeles, to reactivate connections, to fight for what was lost. That night, sitting at the dining table with the project papers crumpled in his hands, He told Sophia, "I was thinking if maybe I should go back to the capital for a while, see what I can salvage." She didn't react immediately. She kept cutting the carrots, as though she hadn't heard him right. Then she looked up, serious but calm. "We're not going to break our peace for money." William looked at her. It wasn't a romantic sentence. It was a declaration of principles, and he understood it, without arguing, without more words. The next day, he cancelled the meetings in the capital. He stayed. Months later, Sophia began to feel different. Dizziness, sensitivity, a tiredness that didn't come from work. One morning, after much hesitation, she bought a pregnancy test. Positive. It was a soft but deep blow. She cried. Not out of sadness, but not just out of happiness either. It was fear. It was surprise. It was joy. It was everything together. William arrived minutes after she finished crying in the bathroom. He found her sitting on the floor, the test in her hand. He didn't ask. He just hugged her. Days later, they went to their first ultrasound. When the doctor showed them the black and white image, William held it as if it were gold wrapped in paper. "Our love created this. It's real," he said in a broken voice, without hiding it. Sophia decided to take a break from work, not completely, but enough to slow the pace. The restaurant kept running thanks to a team she had trained with patience, and now led together with William. He took on more administrative responsibilities, but without complaining. Everything adapted, as it should. The nights, since their daughter was born, became a mixture of tenderness and chaos. William changed diapers awkwardly. Sophia learned to calm the crying without losing her calm. Dark circles became part of the uniform, but so did the laughter. They laughed about everything, about the first sneeze, about the first puree that ended up on the wall, about the sacred silence of a shared nap. They named her Charlotte because that's exactly what she represented. Not just a new life, but a clear sign of everything they had rebuilt together. Hope that love could rise from the rubble. That family wasn't defined by perfect photos, but by the sincere hugs after the exhaustion. One afternoon, while Sophia played with her daughter on the living room carpet, throwing a colorful ball and making her laugh with silly noises, William stayed in the doorway. He didn't want to interrupt. He just watched, and he thought, "I never imagined that my greatest victory would be this." Because yes, he had had successes, important contracts, shiny offices, expensive suits, but none of that felt as fulfilling as seeing Sophia in that scene, alive, free, happy. Nothing compared to hearing that little laugh echoing in their home. And it was true. Everything he had built, deep down, had been for her. The restaurant was awarded as the Revelation of the Year at a national gastronomic event held in Sacramento. The recognition wasn't just for the menu or the culinary proposal, it was for the story behind each dish, each ingredient chosen, each decision made with the heart before strategy. The gala was elegant, full of recognized names, lights, and cameras. But in the midst of it all, Sophia stepped onto the stage in a simple dress, holding her daughter in her arms. She didn't use elaborate words or decorated phrases. She spoke as she always did, with truth. Her voice trembled a little, but her eyes were firm. "This award isn't just for the food," she said, looking at the audience. "It's for second chances, for the people who decide to stay, for those who don't give up, and above all, for the man who saw in me what I couldn't even see myself, and loved me until I believed it." William watched her from a table at the back of the hall. He didn't stand up. He didn't seek the spotlight. He just watched her. His eyes were filled with tears, not because he didn't know what she was thinking, but because hearing her say it aloud, with their daughter in her arms and her story standing tall, moved him deeply. That night, in the hotel room, with the baby sleeping between them, William broke the silence with a sentence that came out without thinking. You saved me too." Sophia looked at him without needing words. She simply hugged him, as if there were no need for further explanation, just the presence of the other. Days later, while they walked through the local market, William proposed something that had been on his mind for a while. "What if we open a foundation?" Sophia looked at him sideways. "A foundation? For helping women who are homeless, like you were, but with gastronomy, a place where they can learn, heal, start over." There was no doubt. She agreed immediately. Thus was born Raíz y Charlotte, Root and Hope. Sophia began visiting shelters, teaching basic cooking classes, listening to hard stories, sharing not only recipes, but also time and attention. The women arrived with their heads down, carrying scars that weren't visible. She welcomed them with an apron on and a phrase she always repeated, "You're not scraps. You're unfinished recipes waiting for the right touch." And with patience, day by day, those women began to rise. They started to believe in their flavor. They began to find a way out. Sophia and William's story caught the attention of an independent producer. They filmed a documentary, not as a fairy tale. It wasn't a perfect story, it was a real story, with pain, stumbles, tough decisions, and a lot of love. A narrative that spoke of dignity, opportunities, and what happens when someone chooses to look beyond judgment. In interviews, when asked how they managed it, Sophia always replied the same way, without embellishments, with truth, and without giving up. Charlotte grew among the aromas of freshly baked bread, laughter in the kitchen, stories of women transforming, and afternoons with stories read from her mother's lap. She was a free girl, full of affection. And although she didn't understand everything that had happened before her arrival, she felt it in the air. In her home, they didn't talk about success. They talked about rebuilding. One afternoon, as the sun poured in through the window, and Sophia played on the floor with the baby, throwing a colorful ball and making her laugh with silly sounds, William stayed by the doorway. He didn't want to interrupt. He just watched and thought it was worth every second. Because yes, because every decision, every fall, every uncertain step had brought him to that moment. And there was no greater triumph than seeing the two people he loved being themselves, without fear. Free, alive. A decade later, the restaurant celebrated its 10th anniversary. 10 years since that first menu, crafted with nerves, since the first trembling hands served plates filled with history. William organized everything discreetly, without announcing anything publicly. He closed the hall for customers and turned the space into something intimate, almost sacred. There would be no speeches, no guests, no flashes. Just one night reserved for them. One night to look back, not with nostalgia, but with the gratitude that comes when you've survived the unimaginable. Sophia arrived with her eyes covered. She expected a regular dinner, something symbolic but simple. She walked arm in arm with William without asking any questions, smiling with suspicion as he guided her down the restaurant's main hallway. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Always," she replied. When she took off the blindfold, she couldn't speak. She cried, without holding back. The room was decorated with warm lights, and at every empty table there was a picture. From that first night when he woke up to find her curled up on the bathroom floor, to the moment when Charlotte dipped her little hands into the dough to help cook. Unfiltered photos, without any poses, just real moments, her with an apron stained with sauce, him with dark circles under his eyes and a silly smile. The first recipe, the first home, the first night their daughter said, "Dad." William took her hand and led her to the kitchen. "I want us to make our favorite dish, together, just us." There was no need to say which one. They both knew. It was the dish that had been born from mistakes improvisations, and memories of Sophia's grandmother's stove. They cooked it in silence, as one does with something sacred. Between wooden spoons, soft glances, and contained smiles. It wasn't just food, it was history. It was everything they had overcome, transformed into aromas and flavors. They ate alone in the empty hall, lit by candles, with the city beating in the distance. Then, without planned music, a soft song started playing from the back of the restaurant. They didn't know its name, they hadn't chosen it, but they got up, took each other's hands, and danced. Without technique, without rhythm, but with everything they felt. In the middle of the dance, Sophia rested her head on William's shoulder and in a low voice asked, "Would you still have chosen me, knowing everything from the beginning?" William didn't hesitate. "I would choose you 1,000 times, with every scar, because that's how you taught me to love for real." Sophia closed her eyes and rested her forehead on his chest. "Thank you for not leaving." "Not even if I wanted to," he replied. "My place has always been here, with you." They sat down afterward in the kitchen, just like so many other nights. Sophia looked back, not figuratively, but literally. She saw the path they had walked as if she could touch it, the cold floor where she had slept, the shame of feeling invisible, the hunger, the fear, and now this table, this child, this home. William, beside her, was holding Charlotte in his arms as she slept. He held her with the tenderness of someone caring for a daily miracle. "Do you remember the bathroom where it all began?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sophia laughed with tenderness. "How could I forget it?" William nodded, looking at their daughter with a mixture of awe and love that needed no explanation. And to think that on that day, everything changed. Sophia stroked Charlotte's hair and said, "You came from a love that had to fight to exist." William looked at her and kissed her forehead. But it made it. That night, their daughter slept between them, in the middle of 2 stories that had already become one. And although the exhaustion weighed heavily on their eyelids, they didn't want to fall asleep. They stayed awake, in silence. There was no urgency. There was no fear anymore. There were no doubts or walls, only a real story full of flaws, and yet complete. They weren't saved by love. They saved each other by loving. And they lived exactly as they promised each other, with truth, with courage, and with warm food on the table.